Right, I'm going to crack on, and I'll just admit other people as they join. So, welcome everybody. Hopefully, you can see me in the camera in the corner of the screen. My name's Alan. For those of you who haven't met me before, and welcome to this month's webinar, 90-day plan for CROs, all about accelerating revenue growth, and a fantastic cross-section of audiences across different platforms coming in here, including on Zoom. Here I've got a team in Scandinavia, attendees from Asia Pac, South Africa, the USA well represented, and the UK, as well as London Business School team over there. So welcome everybody. Thanks very much for attending. And despite the fact that teams and attendees tend to come from a variety of different industries, geographies, and sizes of companies, there's always that one common denominator that I have fed back to me, and that is that everyone's eager to accelerate revenue growth. It's in the job title, isn't it? But also desperate to increase their personal performance and their own credibility. So this particular session is backed by popular demand. I held it a few months ago and got requests for a bit of a repeat. So who's likely to enjoy this session? Well, as I said in the advert, it's definitely suitable for brand new CROs who are looking to quickly establish personal credibility, get control in the new role, but also, and increasingly more so, seasoned CROs who are under pressure to transform the performance and you want some kind of catalyst for growth. So that's what this is aimed at, and it's very much an exec level plan. And what I'm not going to do is spend tons of time on the detail, not least of which for time. Happy to do that separately, of course. But it's very much, an exec level helicopter view of what the 90-day plan should at least think about. And again, I'm not suggesting that everyone's starting with a completely clean piece of paper. Of course not. The real world suggests that we live in a very much a moving vehicle and things are happening. But hopefully this will act as a bit of a mirror to everybody and hopefully prompt some thoughts for you in your world. Do feel free to use chat if you have any questions, or if you don't feel brave enough to put them on here, just reach out to me afterwards for any additional questions you may have. Here's what we're going to cover today. Brief introduction to explain who I am, but then we'll get straight into it. Just a little bit of a backdrop as what I see as some of the challenges faced by CROs as I walk the corridors of many businesses and my mentees that I speak to daily. And then we'll get into the 90-day plan itself and a little bit maybe about why it matters. I think it's fairly clear why it matters, but let's just set the scene for that. And then we'll get into some specific examples and look at a 90-day plan itself. So just a quick few seconds on me, for those of you who maybe haven't had the chance to catch up with me before. I probably can sum up my career into three-thirds. My formative years were actually as a professional sportsman, hence the Olympic rings. But then the majority of my grown-up career, I suppose, has been really as an operator in largely global blue chip companies. And the last one I worked for was WorldPay, which is a very large fintech, one of the world's largest payment companies. Was owned by two private equity companies, Bain Capital and Advent. And for the last 7 years, when I left my role as an operator, as an exec on the board of WorldPay, I was invited to work for the two private equity companies where I get parachuted into businesses to help transform the commercial performance of those businesses. So sit, alongside the CEO and the CRO to set the agenda, the blueprint for growth. And a lot of that comes along with coaching those CROs and lots of sales and marketing teams within them. So in summary, I guess I've got experience of blue chip, private equity and sport, and that gives me very much a results-driven DNA. And I guess to say that customers run through me a little bit like a stick of rock. And then why I created Optilian Limited, which is the brand that I operate under. Well, as I say, I've spent 7 years since I stopped being an operator myself, supporting businesses and commercial executives, after being very much gathering all that experience. And one thing I did observe is that, two things really. The CRO is still a fairly new role. I mean, you might say 10 to 15 years old, maybe in the US, and certainly less in Europe. But secondly, the support for the CRO seems to be incredibly sparse, whether that's formally or informally for that matter. And of course, it's a hugely exposed role, isn't it, with high expectations, and growth is damn difficult. And there's a bit of theory around on some of the individual elements of the CRO role, sales, for example, methodologies, marketing techniques, but there's no real umbrella sort of exec level CRO content or support. And given my backdrop and what I do these days, I'm continually asked for practical, easy to understand, easy to execute, sort of simplified methods and processes that will help CROs win, basically, help them accelerate growth and sustainably. So, given that I'm formally qualified in all those disciplines in the CRO and accumulated tons of knowledge and experience, what I've done is, if you like, crystallize and democratized all that content that I've gathered over the years and learned and turn them into sort of effective, simple stuff without any jargon that I deliver in the form of one-to-one mentoring and coaching, or I parachute in, as I say, as an advisor in portfolio companies. But anyway, that's the end of the advert. But if you are interested in any of that, then please reach out to me if you'd like to learn a little bit more. And so, what am I hearing? I mean, it's interesting to see if this resonates with you guys and girls. But this is kind of these are the top six sort of quotes I've kind of congealed into one really. And I feel very much out of control due to the lack of decent MI, opaque plans. We seem to operate in silos, quite poor at collaborating, being asked to do more with less. We talk about putting the customer at the middle of everything we do, but we still spend a lot of time putting things into, so I'm just letting more people in, still put glossy posters on the wall telling everybody how we put customers there, but actually we then spend our time talking about internal stuff. And then this one around, it's all very well talking about long-term blueprints and strategies, but I've got 90 days to survive, frankly. And that's a real hot one. I mean, I guess the punchlines for me are that CROs feel like they're facing enormous amount of complexity, a lot of noise, which is hugely distracting, quite a bit of conflict, and that whole feeling, that I get described to me is it sort of looks a bit like, I guess this is the best image I could find really to describe some of the time some of the feelings that I have from CROs fed back to me. So the challenge is, how do we accelerate revenue growth, but also how do we survive personally at the same time? So that's the backdrop. I just wanted to also signpost before we get into the meat of the 90-day plan. Just set this against the benefits of the backdrop of these top 10 CRO mistakes. I'm not going to get into this now. I've got my last month's webinar was exactly this, and I'm just showing you one slide from it. But I've written a lot about this. There are these top 10 things around what kills a CRO. Any one of them can kill, and I've seen people, their careers ending on the back of some of these. No vision, lack of ambition, not able to focus properly, not demonstrating enough urgency, not optimizing skills and resources, still operating in silos and struggling to unify the teams and getting collaboration moving, not safeguarding their existing customers, not getting their finger on the pulse, not be able to stop the amount of activities and initiatives that are going on, and certainly, probably lastly, but certainly not least, not managing to manage the mood music around them. So I'll just signpost this because the 90-day plan will have remedies that attack all of these issues as well. If you want to read more about this, I've actually written quite a few blogs and posts. There's a newsletter that I wrote that summarizes some of the punchlines from this as well in the last month or so. But I just wanted to signpost that. Um, why does this 90-day plan matter? Well, I mean, don't need to labor this point too much, do I? But it's obviously what I would describe as a professional vehicle for getting control, cutting through that chaos, as I like to call it. But equally important, I think, is the ability to demonstrate that you've got control, which therefore gives you personal credibility. People see that you've got a plan, then they start to breathe a bit of a sigh of relief, don't they? They might argue with the content of the plan, and that's the next bit, but the fact that you have a plan obviously operates as a plan itself, but also hopefully calms down some of the stakeholders around you to demonstrate that you're in some sort of control. And of course, what it also does is it makes it a lot easier to optimize your very rare and expensive skills and resources and pull teams together in a way that makes them much more collaborative. I also like to think that it just demonstrates in a visible way a sense of urgency and obviously ambition, which in itself is really important. And of course, it's all about that accelerating growth agenda, excuse me. So for me, I'd be interested to see what your own thoughts are. These are sort of four pretty important reasons why everybody should have some kind of 90-day plan, even if it's not as you're walking in the door in the new role. If it's about kickstarting growth, if it's about restarting the engine, then having this type of document together, this type of approach is really, really powerful in terms of what it is, but also what it looks like it is. Now, in terms of the fundamentals behind it, in my mantra, it's always been really the foundation of my own, whatever personal success I've had, either as a practitioner and as a mentor, is to do the basics brilliantly. That's kind of a bit of a slogan. I know it's not a new slogan, but I'll have it for mine anyway. Yeah, like to keep things simple. Don't get seduced by the apparent, sexy AI tool or the glossy machine that's going to sort out world hunger. If we can just, regardless of what industry we're in, whatever geography, whatever size for that matter, these for me are the same core critical success factors. For me, there are four cornerstones that form the foundation for revenue growth. Everything I believe should fit into these four areas, regardless of sales, marketing, customer success, etc., regardless of whether you're a SaaS business or a more traditional products and services business for that matter. You know, optimizing the organization, retaining and growing customers, winning new customers, and applying leadership and control are for me the four cornerstones. And we can argue about the use of language and whether they mean the same things, but actually, if we focus on these four things, then you're going to be exceptional in what you do. And by the way, we need to do all four of them. You can't just cherry pick one or two of them and hope the rest will come in place. You need to focus on all four of these areas. And these are the areas that are very much at the foundation of the 90-day plan. So, without further ado, here's the very simple template that I'm going to talk to today. It's very much an exec level plan on a page, as I described earlier. The funny thing is, sometimes CROs and many leaders understand much more about the detail of some of the elements in these plans than they do the strategic pillars themselves. And that's again another piece of just reminding ourselves of the real things that matter. So before we get into all the detail, have we actually got the headlines correct? And again, I recognize that every business is very different. We don't start from the same point. Many of these things will be in place, but it's worth taking this approach regardless. And I'm also going to identify what I think are the critical elements relating to revenue acceleration. I'm not trying to create an exhaustive list of everything you should ever do. I'm going to focus on doing the basics brilliantly. Now, some of these elements might be completed. That's great. Were they completed properly or not? That's for you to judge. Were they done in the right order or in the right sequence? Questionable. What I've also tried to do in here is just call out some quick wins because I do think that's important too, even though, 90 days is fairly quick. Within the 90 days, think about it as 30, 60, 90 days. It's nice to get some quick wins straight in the door for credibility and frankly for results. I've also a number of helpful tools and templates for all of these areas that I'm covering today, and many more besides. So if any tools would be helpful to you, then just reach out to me. This is going to feel like a whistle-stop sprint through a number of big topics. So do think of this as a little bit of a checklist. So I'm going to start with optimizing the organization, which is that top row, creating a fit for purpose, growth orientated operating model which maximizes customer facing time. That's what this is all about. Now, I'm going to go through this slide deck just horizontally, if you like. So I'm going to talk about optimizing your organization first. Then we're going to talk about retaining and growing customers, winning new customers, and leadership and control. But obviously, when it comes to executing this plan, you'll be working your way through month one, month two, month three, across all of these areas simultaneously. But I had to pick one way of sequencing this, and this is the one I've picked. And of course, again, the ordering will change depending on maybe where you are, what's in place already. However, but just starting right at the top left-hand corner here, sequence for me is important. And frankly, the foundation for pretty much everything else, in my humble opinion, is the set of people you have. They're the most valuable asset you have in your company, really arguably behind customers, but let's just keep it internal for a moment. Your people, the skills and the levels of motivation are absolutely fundamental to your team. So whenever I've walked into a door first, I absolutely want to understand the levels of skill and will, a quick basic understanding of my team. The strategic growth plan will educate you on the detailed needs of these people later on, but just get a sense of, do I have any passive aggressive people in the team? Do I have any complacent people? Any no-nos for anybody that's ever read any John Cotter books around dealing with people? I think identifying some people and frankly being seen to deal with them quickly sets the mood, culture, stamps your own brand, doesn't it? If you can get into some of these specific people right early on. But as a fundamental start point, you need to understand who you've got in your team and kind of at a very basic level. And there's some tools I can show you that can help you do that nice and quickly. But that's the first thing I think about. Then what can we stop doing? How do we maximize customer facing time? Well, that means, what should be done by someone else? What is it our frontline sales teams, I've heard all sorts of surveys that I wrote about last week that suggest that salespeople are spending a maximum of 28% of their time actually selling. How do we improve that? People like to do certain things, but they're not necessarily the right things. So there are techniques for how we can understand that and win the team over quickly. We can remove the excuses for why they're not doing something they should be, and improve the motivation. By the way, employee engagement goes up when you stop things having to be done that maybe should have been done by someone else, or frankly should never have been done at all. Again, we can revisit this later when the strategy is set, so you can ensure you're focusing on being seen to focus on exactly the right things and give permission to stop doing even more stuff. But again, I think a nice quick win, hence I've circled this one in red, is to just something I call Project Oxygen, which is to get the teams themselves to shout out the things they're doing that they shouldn't be doing, and then maybe suggesting someone else that should be doing them better in another department, for example. But anyway, I won't digress too much for now. And then, of course, a little bit later, I'll call it month two, but you decide on the specific timetable. You can start to get a bit more forensic about the actual team competencies that we may be looking for, both in the management layers or in the frontline sales or marketing teams. Um, you know, Question for you to reflect on really is how well do you understand the critical competencies that are actually required for your frontline teams? Um, Perhaps maybe you have, maybe you haven't, but I think you should have is the kind of punchline there. I think you need to advertise what they are as well, so there are no surprises. Create some transparency around it. So that's something to think about. Um, Also, when it comes to the people piece, just satisfying finance a little bit, I guess, and sort of getting ahead of the CFO telling you what good looks like. I think it's important for you as a leader to understand how to baseline your own return on investment with your people. What does good look like? Before we look at revenue growth targets, understanding the operating model a bit more scientifically will help you understand what type of return on investment you're looking for. I wrote a piece recently on ambition and coupled with some market related actions that I put in place as well. I said you should ask yourself, what would it take to blow the doors off as it relates to revenue growth? And that doesn't mean to say that I keep the existing team I have and the same budget that I had for last year, perhaps. It's much more nuanced than that. What if I had 10 more people? Could I double the size of the market, etc., etc.? But anyway, as a baseline, as a minimum, just getting to quickly understand what value are your existing teams generating and doing that before finance tells you what the answer is. So you just can be on the front foot. And again, once you've got some of those things in place, then you can start to think about drafting the go-to-market operating model, along with some strategic stuff we'll talk about later on the marketing side. But this is not an org chart I'm talking about. It's just purely, how many types of resources, what types of skills, what types of resources should we have in place to execute this plan that we're going to put together. And of course, that is informed, as I said, by other findings in other parts of the plan. It may be a target operating model that you can ease into gradually over time, or you might want to take a big bang approach. But I think having that draft operating model in place within 90 days is something that's a sensible type of timescale. And of course, mimicking that to think about the performance management piece, reinforcing the right behaviors consistently and making sure that that's done across the silos is an absolute imperative. Lots of times I'll walk into businesses where they have incredibly ugly performance management processes, bonus and different reward schemes that frankly often reward the wrong behaviors and are certainly not consistent across the departments. So for me, there should be three pillars in a performance management plan: performance, standards, and skills. And again, I've got stuff I can bore you with in great detail if you want to reach out to me on that topic. But essentially, just get the basics in place and make sure you can test that the performance management plan is actually reflective of the behaviors that you want to see displayed across the teams. So, told you this was a whistle stop. We're going to move quickly down to retaining and growing customers. So, I mean, let's face it, the customer base, it's the crown jewels of your business, okay? We often take it for granted. And I often walk into businesses and immediately ask the question, who is your most important customer? And I would like you to reflect on that for a second. You know, the number of times, first of all, I get a lot of river dance or tap dancing in front of me because no one's maybe thought that question through that thoroughly. But secondly, I tend to get told who the largest customer is. And again, that's the wrong answer too. But whatever it is, you should seriously think about the existing customer base. Attrition is an absolute killer, isn't it? Of both you as a personal CRO, but also the business. So it's crucial that you need to be objective about understanding the attrition risk, the churn risk of customers in your business, whatever your business is. And I would always argue, and I've got a number of tools that actually assess this in a bit of detail. All churn risks, all attrition risks really fall into four categories. At least the ones I've found are. So let me know if you see another topic. But I think they're either relationship orientated, they're operational, they're about competitors, or there's something around the commercials. Those for me are the four big buckets of risk that you need to get your head around and understand the potential churn risk. There's nothing worse than taking on a new role or kickstarting a new project of growth to find a customer walks out of the door, within minutes. That would be a total and utter disaster. Um, Secondly, and I don't see this done enough, think about how you segment your growth. This is back to my point around who your most important customer is. The number of times I see the lazy approach to segmentation, which is just group them by size of customers, small, medium, large, this sort of thing. It's incredibly lazy. We need to segment our customer base with a growth pair of spectacles on, right? They need to think about who are the most important customers for us as we grow the business, i.e., that will be the largest companies with the biggest amount of white space. That would be in my book, and certainly for existing customers. But the point is, you can still operate with a vertical lens in terms of how you go to market, but you need to think much more subtly and more scientifically about the way that you group your customers with a growth lens on, because not all customers want to be treated the same. Okay, just because they're large, small, medium doesn't make them good or bad, right? We need to think about how we use digital channels, self-service channels for the smaller customers who we've got everything with, and they just more transactional relationship. Equally, those that have a bigger opportunity and more complex, we need to take a different approach to those people, and that should also be reflected in the draft operating model that we talked about earlier on. White space, classically, right at the beginning, need to understand where it is. How much have we got? This feeds into the segmentation, of course, as well. It also informs your effective campaign targets. Just gives an early view of the size of your growth opportunity. And that's really important that you understand that before you get told what the opportunity is by somebody who doesn't have a clue, but might be setting your targets for you. So as you go forward, perhaps then's the time when you've done these basics as around your existing customers. So I'm just letting some more people in. Sorry about that. They missed a bit, haven't they? Um, Playbook for me, and it's a non-negotiable. Do you have one? Is it fit for purpose? This is all about making sure you can get control, consistency, professionalism, and frankly, guarantee the quality, or at least try to guarantee the quality of what's going on across your front lines when it comes to going to market through marketing, sales, and customer success. It just allows the management of the team so much easier, no excuses environment, but also you can get the inclusion of the teams in there to develop that playbook and make sure that they own it and feel like they've designed it themselves rather than had it put on them. But anyway, getting a playbook in place, and then even if it's a basic one to start with, just keep on developing that later on. It demonstrates the level of professionalism that you're looking for. And then quick wins, two of them here. I love to just get a campaign going. I just get one in just early, just galvanizes the teams, injects a sense of fun, sense of urgency, importantly, and also obviously some wins you can put on the doors. My favorite, back to the customer's floor. Always like this because it's a very inclusive campaign that gets management involved. It gets people from even beyond the CRO's empire, whether you're in product development or IT. Go and spend some time with the customer in their world, understanding how they do what they do. Nothing to do with what you sell on products, although obviously covertly it's all about selling, isn't it? However, but just getting into their world and understanding their business challenges, a great example. But it just sets a sort of a spring in a step. That's how I like to think of it, by getting one of these campaigns going early. I mean, I know campaigns are not a new phenomena, but timing of them and just setting them up in the right way at the right time can just inject a little bit of adrenaline. Um, and obviously, from whatever you've seen in that first piece of work, and you pull this forward, please, as well, not from, don't wait for month two if you can, but from that attrition risk stuff you did in the first month, whatever you do, address any potential customers that are looking to walk. That becomes an absolute imperative. It's also incredibly symbolic as well. And then I think when you've started to understand the market, you've segmented your market, you've built the playbook, you're then able to start to think about your customer success plans, your account development plans, where you deploy those. Getting more scientific, much higher quality of engagement with the customers that matter. And again, linked to the draft operating model, whether that's a customer success manager or an account manager, whatever language you're using, starting to get much deeper into the relationships with your customers is really important. And the engagement plan for me is the one that will then include your senior execs as well. So you're starting to look at maybe sponsorship of certain customers and getting much, much closer depending on the strategy that you've set for yourselves. So winning new customers, we all know that that's pretty important. Probably easier to grow the existing ones, but nonetheless, we all like to grow and win new customers. I just think it's important to get control and manage expectations in this space really early. Targets are often dished out, aren't they, without any foundation or any evidence at all. Sometimes it's just based upon maybe what somebody did last year, or they've come up with a harebrained idea that you could, come up with hundreds of new customers. Very typical in private equity companies I work in, by the way. They think that you can just shoot for the stars and everything's possible. It isn't. It's often unrealistic. So I think it's important to try and get a grip of the mood music in this whole space very early. And ways to do that for me, really just assess the size of the prize. Quite often this is never done. It's just sort of never ceases to amaze me. You have really good CROs will assess the size of their universe. Okay, what's that whole market out there? And then they do the maths and define the actual opportunity. They're not governed by the targets. They will also think, as I said earlier on, about how to blow the doors off, but it's not done with a load of blind faith. It's take a little bit of time, and it doesn't take much time, this, to just get the market data, assess the size of the whole full potential of the market, and then you'll have that as your benchmark. So whatever else happens then, you can set some realistic targets based upon what you know to be true, because you will have the most truth. No one else in your organization will know as much as you do about the size of that market. Then I think you back to the segmentation. Make sure you spend the time segmenting the market based on attractiveness and your ability to serve, and calculate realistic ambitions for it, the right goals and dependencies. What do you need? What resources? What skills? What partners will give you the credible ammunition for those dry conversations, won't they, with the CFO or indeed the CEO with his wild assumptions? So that means you've got something that's just a little bit more scientific to discuss, and then have an arm wrestle about, of course, when they disagree with it. But you're holding the cards, well, nice and early. And then, of course, the playbook, I won't repeat what I said, but that same playbook, hence the little line here, will apply both to new customers and existing ones. Um, and you can leverage that in the same way. And of course, when it comes to the prospects, then you can start to think about how to, dipping into the marketing arena for us for a moment, take the time to set the right criteria for what a good customer looks like. What sort of compelling events are you looking at? Are they locally or at an industry level? Whether they're contract anniversary triggers, personnel triggers, whatever they are. But take the time to actually define what a great prospect will actually look for. And of course, then you can then build the right lead generation qualification criteria within it, and then later in the month, month three, you can then start to put some proper stuff together, informed by all of this work you've put in earlier. I'm simplifying this, as you all know what I mean when it comes to creating pull and push and leveraging AI tools. Whatever you're doing, just make sure you spend the time on this particular area, which is understanding what a real great prospect or suspect looks like, and what the sweet spots you're looking for are. It's often glossed over, and we just jump straight to the largest potential prospect that's out there. And then sprinting on further, um, for me, this is a really critical one. How we lead and how we manage. It's an easy, quick win on the one hand, the way we behave. People mimic how we behave as leaders and what sort of things we ask about. Having intentional conversations, for examples. Um, I'll talk about customer-centric leadership. I won't spend any time really now on this, but it's a real cracker. We've just got to formalize how we operate ourselves. And there's a McKinsey four-box model I'll show you just at the end as to what I'm just referring to here. But don't take this lightly. Think about how you're managing and leading as a team and how you want to begin your tenure in the role if it's a new one. But getting to the sort of nuts and bolts of what I would actually do as a leader, right? Clean the pipeline. Pretty much every time I've walked into a new business, it's a work of fiction. So whether that's been a role you've been in for even a year or two, think about a pipeline amnesty, right? Don't trust the existing shape as it is. You get one chance to get a clean sheet for everybody here. Um, Give them that chance and maybe just get something done because there's so many bad looking pipelines out there that here's your time to sort of create a bit of a nice amnesty. Another quick win, build a win room, build a war room, whatever you want to call it. Fantastic way to change the mood, create a sense of urgency, whether it's a physical one or a virtual one for that matter. It just it's a place that people can go and spend time looking at the charts, accelerating decision making, great for team working and learning for that matter. But just creating that environment just changes the scene. It just gives you another sense of urgency, as I say, that little shot of adrenaline. And of course, make sure you create some simple exec dashboards, but just focus on three things to start with. You're going to change your mind perhaps later because you're going to draft the plan later in this cycle. But start by just focusing on one or two things that you really want to emphasize, and you just repeat those things to focus on them, ad nauseum, frankly. And then get the governance structure in place. Create a sense of like I'll call it a drumbeat of activity. These are the basics for getting control in place. Get the transparency in place. As I say, start with those few KPIs. Be consistent with what you measure and consistent with the questions you ask, and then get that drumbeat cadence of reviews, whether it's daily, weekly, fortnightly, monthly. You know the score. You do this already, but just make sure it's relevant to the points that you're trying to get across the strategy that you put in place. And you can tweak that a little bit later on, of course. And then this one about forecasting, arguably one of the most boring subjects known to man. However, you want to keep finance in their box, don't you, as a CRO? You don't want them to take control. You want to have a proper, robust way of thinking how you forecast. Again, a big subject on its own that we haven't got time to get into today, but make sure you've got one. And even if you change your mind, make sure you've got one. Make sure you demonstrate you've got one. Advertise you've got one. Think about how, if you have CRM, of course, there's no end of amount of data you can use for it, but make sure it's robust because it's the one thing that I see CROs trip over day after day is just not having a credible forecast. And of course, it's largely based upon the crap pipeline that we talked about earlier on. So get those things in order and your credibility goes up very, very fast. And if you don't get them in order, the opposite is true. You'll get people climbing all over you, asking question after question. You'll be asked to go and do deep dives on certain areas. Think about that early. And of course, you can improve it over time. And then lastly here, get the execs involved early, formalize customer exec engagement with customers. I think this is a key one as part of the early stages of what you're doing. It's great because it helps them take some responsibility for what it's like working in your world, right? You can share the pains of what it's like being punched in the face by customers all the time and get them on side, frankly, when you need funding or resources as well. And then you're then into the phases, I think, of thinking about the continual improvement processes. What are they? Engaging in things like ADP reviews, win-loss sessions, and so on. But set those up so that you have this continual improvement culture, and that people feel that it's motivational and it's supportive. But it's also going to be very powerful for getting things right. And then finally, you're in some sort of state where you can start to pull together that proper strategic plan that you've been working towards by having all this other activity put in place. Well, I know that's incredibly high level and helicopter viewed, but I do think that's a pretty good set of fundamentals to think about as you look at that kind of a kickstart 90-day plan for growth, or if you're new in the role. The one thing I also want to signpost, as I said earlier, is be this transformational customer-centric leader. Be seen to be that person. I deplore you to do it, right? It's not another thing to do this, by the way. This is the way you should be working. If you do this, you'll be in the top 1% CROs, in my humble opinion. And it won't happen by accident. It's about you as a leader committing to these four simple behaviors. I'll quickly signpost them now. You know, creating, by the way, I've stolen this from McKinsey's, the four-box model of transformation. So I've sort of bastardized it into this one for more practical use. Uh, I understand what's being asked of me, right? So this is about, why am I doing this? Your team will want to know very quickly, am I motivated? People seek congruence between their beliefs and their actions, don't they? Their belief in the why inspires them to behave in the support of whatever change you're putting in place, doesn't it? But role modeling, you know what that means. People mimic you, don't they, and the groups who surround them, consciously and subconsciously for that matter. So it's critical for you as a CRO to be acting and communicating in the ways that are aligned with the changes you're bringing in place. There's no good just telling them to do something if you're acting in a different way. So make sure that you are role modeling the right behaviors. And of course, if we want people to behave in a different way, we might recognize that people need new skills, and that's fine. Or we need to enhance our resources to provide more customer-centric skills across the team. Point is, we need to make sure they're in place. And of course, last but not least at all is, what gets measured gets done, doesn't it? Associations, consequences shape behavior. And leaders often, I see, don't realize that even though they're undertaking a change, they're not actually reflecting that in what they're measuring. Their incentive systems are often rewarding the old way of doing things. I see this a lot. Or frankly, sometimes they're rewarding conflict because they're not measuring the right things. Anyway, this is a huge topic on its own, but I just signpost this for food for thought. All four of these things must be done simultaneously. It's not good enough to just cherry pick one or two of them, because it just becomes completely ludicrous if you're role modeling something and telling a story about leadership, but then you're measuring something completely at odds with it. So I've used this model personally in my day job when I was a practitioner, and I coach it regularly now, and people absolutely love it. It's really simple, very much an easy way to behave in my day-to-day role as a leader. And I could tell you more about it if you want. Um, I'm going to share some free tools with you now. Just before I do that, I just want to signpost my own services, if I may. As I say, I've spent the last 7, 8 years advising, coaching, mentoring CROs I say, real cross-section of industries and geographies. I'm flattered by the feedback that I get. Some of it I post. I should probably do more of that on the website. Most of my customers have been with me for many, many years. If you're if you're keen to have a trusted advisor, basically reach out to me. I've opened up a new block of time schedules because I'm doing a lot less flying around the world these days with the various tasks. So I have opened up a new little block of schedules if anybody wants to benefit from my mentoring and coaching. The feedback I get from the CROs I coach is that they start off normally feeling a bit isolated in terms of the advice they get. They're a bit exposed. They're supposed to know everything, but they can't ask anybody, can they? You certainly can't ask anybody inside very easily. So what they're looking for is to increase their knowledge as a CRO, but they also want to leverage maybe the experience and trusted advice from someone who's got the scars on their back, which is me, made lots of mistakes, but hopefully done some good things too. But they want that advice in a nice, safe environment, which is what, you get. Plus, I'll give you a whole ton of tools and techniques that are easy to use. I've got loads of tools, templates that you can see on the website that you can have as all part of this. Um, what I do is, if you want to know more, then just reach out to me. You can see my email address there. What it starts with, just a free chemistry call, I call it. Just we have a chat over Zoom for as long as you like, and I explain a little bit about how I operate. You can tell me a little about yourself, and we decide if that's something you'd like to progress. So, nice, safe, easy way of moving things forward if you're interested. Um, just want to shout out, if you want any free tools, just give me a shout. They'll have a whole set of stuff that relates to each of those four cornerstone areas today. For example, I have that customer-centric leadership model that we talked about a minute ago with some specific ideas and actions you can put in place for those four areas. I have skill will templates. We talked about segmentation models, return on investment model, attrition risk calculator, one of my favorites. Sounds really dull, but it isn't. Playbook templates, maybe a new business ready reckoner might be useful from what we talked about. How to build a war room, some example governance plans, customer engagement plans. Honestly, if you go to the website, you'll see some photos just like this on there. If you're not sure, just reach out and I'll happily send you something completely free of charge, if they're of use to you. Equally, if you have any questions at all, then please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I just hope today you found something useful and would have prompted some thoughts for you. Um, I think a lot of you do this already, perhaps, but follow me on LinkedIn. You'll get and you can subscribe to my newsletter. I try to write one every couple of weeks. I have done for the last couple of years now. Try to pick out some hot topics, those that people feed back to me, some research that I see with some observations and but hopefully some ideas as to how to deal with them. There's some more blogs, there's more information on the website here as well. So let's say, please reach out to me directly if you want some coaching, mentoring, or just want to have a chat. I'd love to be able to make a difference to what you're doing. I really hope you found that of some use, and I hope to see you again soon. Thanks for coming.